World War II is a major change for Chinatown and the Chinese community. On one hand, the Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943 because Japanese propaganda said to the Chinese, how can you be allies with people who won't even let you into their country? So the Congress, in their embarrassment, repealed the law. That by itself didn't make much of a difference because the quota was still something like 105. But it was symbolic. And in fact, it was important because now you could get naturalized. People who have been here for decades could now get naturalized. More significant was that Chinese men were drafted into the army or volunteered into the army. For the first time, they became part of American society. They began to be compatriots with other Americans. And this was important for kind of opening up the world. They were sometimes in segregated units with white officers. Sometimes they were integrated into other units. In any case, many hundreds in Boston went into the services. The other important thing about the war was that women, Chinese women, had not been in the workforce at all. They were either so old-fashioned, like my grandmother, who had bound feet. She couldn't even work. But other women, they had to be in the laundry. In fact, many of them really ran the laundries and the restaurants. But during World War II, some of the young women, including Helen Wu, among others, began to work outside of Chinatown. For Chinatown, a more important thing was the War Brides Act. The War Brides Act was created so that servicemen who had served mostly in Europe, who had war brides, that is, had married women from Britain, Germany, France, could bring them back legally. Otherwise, all the other rules applied. And that applied to the Chinese. Many of them already had wives back in China. Others went back to China to find a wife. There were many arranged marriages, as they were. But then they could bring their brides back and start families. And now that coincided with Syrians moving out of the South Cove. Very slowly, the demographic that was heavily bachelor, even with all the families, became more like a normal community. Coming back from the war, the veterans started the American Legion Post in Chinatown, the first one. And they were a very active group in promoting policies. They were more articulate. They were able to deal with the city. Many of them went on a GI Bill to college. So this group of veterans were the key to a lot of the activism that came later. And of course, the women as well, having been exposed, were no longer reliant on online and the English interpreter, who was essentially the liaison to the big world. And now we had people who could speak directly for the community, who could understand how things worked in the real world, so that Chinatown could participate. In the transition before the 1965 Act, there was actually quite a growth of Chinese, both in Chinatown and in the suburbs. So the urban renewal plan actually was a compromise between Tufts and Chinatown, but it created a space for Chinatown. So that Taitung Village, Quincy School, all those were urban renewal sites. And Tufts would have loved to have them. But by that time, the next generation had begun to assert and use its ability and education to further the community's benefit.